Welcome back to Indus Special. While we continue our discussion regarding leadership, we're now joined by Ms. Lera Boroditsky, who's a cognitive scientist and professor in the fields of language and cognition. She's joining us from California. We're also joined by Mr. Zain Ashraf, who's the founder of Seed Out, which is Pakistan's first crowdfunding platform that works to end poverty. He also helps establish entrepreneurs with interest-free microfinancing. He's joining us from Hong Kong. Thank you both for joining us. Ms. Lera, let me begin with you. Now, in the first half of this show, we talked about how listening is important for leaders and to be receptive to their team. But can you tell us how important effective communication is and how they can make sure that their communication is solid and positive?
Of course. It starts with listening. When you listen, you know where it is that you can meet the people you're trying to lead. But then what you want to do is inspire people to be their best. So people don't work best when they're terrified. They don't work best when they're scared. They work best when they feel that you have a common purpose and you're aspiring to do something together, to be part of something that's bigger than just yourself. And so effective leaders will communicate that common purpose, will communicate the goal, where we're all going together, and then inspire people to perform their best to contribute to that common goal.
Right. And in this, you mentioned that people do not work well at all when they're under fear or they're terrified. Now, one of the things that brings to my mind is when leaders or bosses often micromanage, something that has been an age-old practice. But that a lot of literature shows that people get uneasy when that happens. Can you shed light on that?
Sure. All of us have had the experience of being micromanaged either by a boss or maybe a family member. And the thing that micromanaging does is it undercuts your sense of competence, that often you feel like, I know how to do these things. But if someone tries to tell you how to do little things, you feel like they don't have trust in you, and it breaks that bond of trust that you have to have in your leader. And that bond of trust has to go both ways. You have to trust that your leader is taking you where you need to go, but you also need to feel that they trust you and trust your competence to achieve your goals.
Right.
In some ways, the most important thing that any of us can do is self-leadership, right? So almost all of us will spend most of our time actually trying to lead ourselves, trying to make sure that we do our best. That's a constant task for everyone. And so when you think about how to lead other people, start thinking about the kind of grace and the kind of compassion you would want to offer yourself. You don't want to micromanage yourself. You don't want to second guess yourself constantly. That doesn't feel good. And that doesn't feel good when you apply it to other people.
Right. Mr. Ashraf, you help people establish themselves as entrepreneurs. What are some of the traits or some of the things that you tell them to focus on, especially when you're trying to compete in this hostile economic environment and when there's so many different competing interests? What is the one thing you tell them to focus on for them to be good leaders?
Right. I think there's not just one thing to become a good leader. But I would like to say this, a mix of lots of things. First of all, I think you have to create a win-win for yourself and for your consumer or anybody you're serving in your market. Secondly, I think that you really have to believe in yourself. If we can take example of Wright brothers, they were the ones who took the first man-controlled flight. But on the other hand, there was this another guy who was American funded, and he has all the money that, he could buy, the best minds money could buy. But then again, Wright brothers were able to take the first man-controlled flight. And that was the reason that, they believed in themselves. And these were cyclists, and all the people working for them was also not being paid, right? So this is when you work for a bigger cause, not just money. Money automatically follows. So I think the first thing first is that you really have to believe in yourself, believe in your idea. And also, I think a leader is the one who sees an opportunity and grabs it. Right. And also who likes to allocate the right jobs to the right people as well.
Right. Now, you mentioned here that there needs to be an aim that's bigger than money. And I agree with you. But most businesses, like we know, they have profit maximization as their main goal. Now, how does that translate when a leader is only focusing on that? How does that translate to the team? What do you think the impact of that is?
Right. That's a very short-term goal, Meshal. Like if you're just motive is profit making, there's always going to be a saturation point very soon. Because what happens is that, there would be somebody else in the market or society who would be one step ahead of you because he believes in his vision. So when you see the last thing and you put that thing as a priority in your business, so when you don't have a clear vision and you're not delegating that vision to your employees or your team, then you're not able to reach the place that you want to be.
Right. Ms. Lera, going back to you and talking about all of this, goals and values. Now, it's very easy for the leader themselves to have certain values and goals, and they want to aspire towards them in full force. But how can they, through their body language, through their communication skills, through their tone, through many other things, how can they communicate and motivate their employees?
Of course, leaders most effectively lead by example. So if you don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk, if you yourself act in the same way that you want your employees to act, that's the most effective approach, is to live the life that you actually want other people to model. In general, people respond really well to calm, steady leadership, not someone who changes their mind from moment to moment. They like to know what to expect, and they want to feel like they can do a good job because they can prepare. So leaders that stay calm, who are not prone to anger, leaders who can communicate in ways that are clear, that reach their employees, and also leaders that leave those channels of communication open so that they aren't just speaking to people, but also let everyone else feel like they can speak back.
Right. And those are great qualities to have. But sometimes people assume that all these qualities are also synonymous with being passive. They're not authoritative enough. And with that, they won't be able to get the job done. People will slack off or they will take advantage of them. Now, this thing that leadership, those in leadership positions, that they have to reconcile with this balance, how do you think you would talk to them and tell them not to be too authoritative, not to drill one point, and how they can strike that balance?
People offer you trust and offer you their compliance because they agree with you, because they feel like you're taking them to the right place. And the way you do that is by establishing those lines of trust, by feeling like when you are the most powerful person in the room, your main job is to serve all of the other people in that room, because that's what you can do with that power that will be the most effective. And when that is the way that you use your power to serve people around you and to serve people in the broader world, people see that your intentions are pure, they're excellent, and that's when people want to follow you.
Right. Mr. Ashraf, going back to you and talking about how you yourself are a very young entrepreneur, how do you get people to see your vision, and how do you think you relate to different ages? I mean, there's this talk about how you need multi-generational teams. You should be able to work with all ages. How do you do that successfully?
Right. I think it's very important that you are translating your vision very clearly to your employees. And secondly, I think you have to, because the problem with the new generation is that they are so used to instant gratification because of social media era that, they don't find the impact in 2 months or 3 months. So when you are dealing with different generations, obviously you have to keep in mind that what age group you are hiring in your team, right? Secondly, you have to create a balance that, they feel as much motivated as you are. And that can happen two ways. Either you are explaining your vision very clearly and they believe in you and they believe in the cause. Also, they're the equal stakeholders of your company as well. In my company particularly, what I do is basically from my janitor till the top management company employee is the does the profit sharing of the company, right? And I have like 30% growth every year in my company. And there's so many other things as well that, we hire the best people, we allocate the right jobs to the right people, and we watch them like hawk. You have to have 3 Ps, like people, process, and product.
Right.
It all comes down to one thing that, it can give you a really good impact if you're really merging them well together.
Right. And something interesting you mentioned here was about the younger generation and how they're used to instant gratification because of all the technology and fast responses around them. How do you think good leaders in this day and age need to keep them engaged and need to keep them focused, if that's what you were talking about?
Right. I think you need constant motivation sessions, in-house trainings, because there are so many opportunities in the market, in the society. Because, for example, somebody starts a job and very next day, the same person is applying to 3 different more companies. Maybe they're not finding the instant gratification, or they're not seeing the impact. I think that the leader comes in because he has to be in constant communication with the employees, showing them, taking them to see the results as well. Like
Right.
in my organization as well, I always like to take my employees from the office to field work as well. So they're directly connected with the impact, right? They're seeing what they're actually doing in the society. So that's very important, that, you are communication very properly, and you're, coordinating with all the team members.
Right. And Ms. Lera, we're talking about this instant gratification changes. How do you think it's important to keep people focused, and not just employees or anyone, but anyone who's leading any segment of the community? How do you get them to be focused on one thing when there's so many other options and distractions?
I think it's really important to keep the common goal in mind. A good leader has a much larger view of the situation of the whole company, the future, than any of the employees, because they're getting information from all of the sources filtering up to them. So it's like they're standing on top of the mountain. They're getting a much better view. And it's their job to then communicate that view, that broad view, to the employees, to keep them focused, not just on where they're going, but why they're going there. When people have that sense of common purpose, common goal, it's a lot easier to understand why you're doing something, and why a particular task that you're doing today is a small part of a much larger thing. When you feel like you're contributing to something larger than yourself, you can get a lot of satisfaction from doing even small tasks.
Right. And the climate that we're living now, we see people who aren't such great leaders either. We hear about so many different instances, from politicians to other company leaders. Now, what do you think do you think there's a change going on in the leadership style that's emerging right now, or one that people want in the future?
I don't know if there is a change. I think there are many different approaches to good leadership, depending on your personality style and the kind of organization that you have. Different approaches might be good or bad, and I think that goes back to the process of listening and keeping communication channels open. So the Dalai Lama once said that when you're talking, you're just repeating things that you already know. But when you listen, you might actually learn something new. And so to be an effective leader in any organization, you really do have to open your ears and keep those communication channels open so that you can stay agile when things change.
Right. And Mr. Ashraf, what are some of the challenges you think that people will have to confront in the coming years while we're talking about all the changes?
I think these are the challenges, as I explained before, that there's one thing: instant gratification our younger youth requires. They see, because when you hire somebody, it's very difficult to retain your employees for a longer period of time. So I think we really need to create those comforting environments. As Lera said, we need to think about the why, because we need to stop focusing on how and what we do. We need to start with why we do what we do.
Right.
So I think that's the most important factor. And if you inculcate and integrate those values within your team members, you would be able to see the results.
Right. And you mentioned the environment here. I'd just like to refer to a Harvard Business Review study of over 60,000 leaders, in which they found that the highest rated leaders were those who were goal-oriented, but also focused on having a fun environment. And now only 13% of these 60,000 leaders qualified that and fit that criteria. Seeing this, how difficult do you think it is to be both?
Yeah, it is. But I think you really have to invest in your employees, human resource, and team. Like Jim Goodnight at SaaS company said, it's a multi-billion-dollar company, and they do data mining. And he said that, I have a very simple formula, which is one triangle. He says that if my employees are happy, my customers are happy, and if my customers are happy, and I'm happy. Likewise, Bill Gates said, every day I have to make sure that 95% of the asset of my companies goes out of the door, and I have to make sure they come back the next morning. So you
Right.
have to create those environments, and you have to invest back in your employees, and ultimately they are going to reap benefits for you.
Right. Ms. Lera, while we're talking about all of these names, of course, talking about successful people, and list comes out, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, all these people. And there's always this question, what do all successful people have in common? Do you think from all your studies and research, you were able to find any commonalities?
There's so many different approaches to leadership, and there are many good, successful approaches to leadership. There are definitely some personality traits that are conducive to leadership. So people who are extroverted are likely to be able to reach people. People who are conscientious are likely to be able to get things done. People who are high in agreeableness are likely to be able to create a good, warm environment and establish those good lines of communication. But even if those aren't your natural tendencies, those are skills you can develop to be a good leader. And in fact, a lot of the names that you mentioned are people who didn't have a history of being a good leader when they started. Maybe they had a singular vision, but they weren't necessarily good at managing other people or inspiring other people to perform their best. And so those are skills that they learned as their companies grew. And I think all of us can continue to learn those skills.
Right. Zain, that same question that I was talking about, all these commonalities we hear about, do you feel like one leader specifically has inspired you to become who you are? And what was that trait?
Definitely. I think, as I said, Jim Goodnight has really inspired me because he says that he has this complete different lifestyle that they've given to their employees. They have given gyms, food courts, saunas, all those facilities that they have poured back at the company for the employees. I believe that, I have done the same with my companies, be small or big scale. And I have seen a lot of great results. And I see that, when your employees are standing shoulder to shoulder, it also creates a positive energy in the company. For example, there's a person who's even in the lower staff members, and they're also asking the operation manager or the production manager every month, how much sale have we done, or how much stock we have. So these kind of the questions, when these questions are coming from irrelevant people who does not even have the relevancy to the job,
Right.
This shows the positive energy in the company.
Zain, but let me just ask you. Let me just ask you this. You mentioned that all of these fringe benefits, they really get employees, motivated to do something well. But if we talk about someone who has a very small-scale startup, they can't afford to give all of these benefits. What would they do for these team-building exercise and to make sure that there is greater cohesion?
Right. The thing is that if you talk about a micro entrepreneur, for him, his main motivation would be cash that he would be taking back to his home, because we live in a country where 40% of the population is living below poverty line. And for a micro entrepreneur, every tomorrow is, for them is going to be better than yesterday. And that's what they struggle for. Obviously, they have very limited cash to play with all those things and elements in business terms. But I think they have to be fair with the consumer. They have to be fair with the market they're playing in. And they have to see that, there are two people. If you see, one would be selling vegetables and the person standing next to him would also be selling vegetables in Pakistan. And one shop would be making a lot more profit than the very next shop. The reason being is that person is, really depicting his personality with, the temperament he has with his consumers, the amount of effort he's putting in getting dressed and having a smile on his face when he's dealing with customers. And, ultimately, this all grows to your profit margin.
Hold on to that thought, Ashraf. I also want to introduce Professor Samina Yasmine, who is a political scientist. She is joining us from Australia. Thank you so much, Professor Samina, for joining us. Now, you teaching students, how do you translate the importance of leadership within them? How do you make them realize the value of it, young individuals?
Well, I basically tell every one of them that each one of them has the capacity to be a leader, but they need to be able to cultivate value of integrity, openness, and sharing information with others, and be willing to learn from others. And I basically give them lots of exercises like simulation exercises in which they have to decide as a group as to what do they want to do. And in that process, they learn who is a leader, for example, in making decisions, who is a leader in drafting resolutions, who is a leader in communicating with others. And this is the way in which they learn from each other and then grow up hopefully to be good leaders in their own right.
Right. And Professor Samina, something interesting you mentioned here was sharing information. And from that, we hear this concept of gatekeepers of knowledge and information, people who want to keep their cards close to their chest because, you know, it helps them accelerate. And even good leaders or professionals who don't really let people know their strategy. What do you think about that?
I think that's a bad strategy because when we hold things to ourselves, we assume that we have all the answers. But it's really in opening up to others and sharing what we think we are planning to do that we really open ourselves up for challenges, criticism, questioning, and we improve our own way of looking at things. And I think that's really what I try and tell my students, that if they're working in a group, they may be able to do research, for example, on the Palestinian two-state solution. But unless they share it with others, together they will not be able to come up with a good suggested resolution.
Right.
And it's only by sharing with others that they can put their minds together and see where.
Right. And on that note, thank you so much, Professor Samina, Yasmine, for joining us. Now we're joined by Ms. Dora Mironova, who's a professor of sustainability studies. She's joining us from Perth. Thank you so much, Ms. Mironova, for joining us. Now, let's move towards the future and talk about maintaining a sustainable environment and a sustainable economy, a sustainable community which retains its culture and values. How would you think that works in with leadership qualities and people who are taking the community forward? What do you think they need to do?
Well, thanks for inviting me to join you. The area of sustainability is really something that everybody should be engaged with. And what we are witnessing is that the leaders, the political leaders we have, are the ones that are least capable of engaging with the issues surrounding climate change. So in many ways, the action has started to come bottom up. And we've seen some amazing examples, such as the 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, who has become a leader and has ignited climate change strikes all over the world. So leadership, when it comes to knowledge and intelligence and ability to grasp these complex issues, actually can come from any walk of life or from any background, and it's often that people who are the most passionate about the issue become the best leaders. The other thing that I would want to add in the area of sustainability is that we need to be working with partnerships. It's impossible to achieve the goals of stopping climate change, of dealing with biodiversity loss, of dealing with pollution without working with partnerships. So the leadership sometimes is good in creating these partnerships across society.
Right.
Yes.
And no, thank you so much, Ms. Dora Mironova, for joining us. We're unfortunately running out of time. Thank you, Mr. Zain Ashraf, and thank you, Ms. Lera Boroditsky. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next week with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.